If I need to talk louder, just give me the thumbs up out there. I'm going to do my best to project here. I'm happy to welcome you all this afternoon to the WNC listening session on closing the health insurance coverage gap. I'm Sarah Thompson, Executive Director with the Southwestern Commission. For all of you to join us here on this beautiful Friday afternoon just shows your commitment to these important issues to the people of our region. I want to recognize today's co-sponsors and thank them for organizing this discussion: the North Carolina Rural Center, the Business Advisory Council of Care for Carolina, and the Cherokee Indian Hospital Authority. And thank you to Brittany Lofthouse, who pulled this all together. Thanks also to Southwestern Community College for hosting us today in the Myers Auditorium, and shout out to Tyler and AJ for helping with all the technical assistance in the live stream. First, I'll recognize our distinguished guests home from the General Assembly in Raleigh. Please welcome our legislative leaders, Senator Kevin Corbin, Representative Mike Clampett, and Representative Carl Gillespie. I'd also like to welcome Chief Richard Sneed from the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indian. So I'm going to introduce our panelists next, and we'll do a few things before we hear from them, but I'd like to introduce so you know who's up here on stage with us. First, we have Casey Cooper, the CEO of the Cherokee Indian Hospital, a Dogwood Health Trust board member, and a member of the North Carolina Council on Healthcare Coverage. Next, we have Dale Wiggins, Graham County Commissioner and a member of the North Carolina Council on Healthcare Coverage. Next to Dale, we have Ronnie Beal, Vice Chairman of the Macon County Board of Commissioners in his fourth term in that role. He's the Vice Chair of the Southwestern Commission Board of Directors. He's the previous president of the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners. He served on the Governor's Mental Health Task Force as a co-chair of the statewide LME MCO committee and on the VIA Mental Health Board for 15 years. There's not a lot that Ronnie doesn't get involved in, so we're pleased to have Ronnie on our panel today, too. Next is Peg O'Connell. Peg is the chair of Care for Carolina, a statewide coalition of 88 organizations committed to finding a North Carolina solution for closing the health insurance coverage gap, what we're all here to talk about today. And she is also the chair of the North Carolina Public Health Association's Advocacy Committee. Welcome, Peg. And finally, we have Patrick Woody, president of the North Carolina Rural Center, chair for the Care for Carolina Business Advisory Council, and also a member of the North Carolina Council on Healthcare Coverage. So before we begin our discussion with the panelists, I'd like to welcome Dr. Susan Mims to the stage. Dr. Mims is the CEO of the Dogwood Health Trust, and she has some welcoming comments for us.
I missed that one somewhere.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be with you all today, especially inside when it's so beautiful outside. I'm so appreciative that everyone is here today to talk about these important issues. And I especially want to thank all of the sponsors and Care for Carolina and all of our elected officials for being here. I am very appreciative to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the work of the Dogwood Health Trust. Dogwood comes from a legacy of caring for the health of the region. And as many of you know, the Dogwood Health Trust was formed from the purchase of Mission Health and really is an asset for the 18 counties of Western North Carolina. So from its inception, there has been a lot of excitement about moving upstream to the work of the Trust purpose, which is to dramatically improve the health and well-being of the people and communities in Western North Carolina. And through a focus on social determinants of health, which basically all those things that influence health that someone needs before they have a problem. I know as a practicing physician, I would often see people in my practice and know that I was so limited by what I could do in the office. And the opportunity to address all of those things that influence health way before people end up in healthcare, and especially in costly healthcare, is very exciting for us. In 2020, the Dogwood Health Trust Board focused the work on 4 strategic priority areas to address this. The first is housing, and we know that housing is essential. People need a their head every night. They need to not be worried about affording their housing, and I know the pandemic has drawn a special attention on this with people losing their place to live. So we have some work to do. The next is education, and this starts with early childhood education and goes all the way through higher ed. We need to ensure that people can finish their degree and have the skills that they need to serve Western North Carolina. And that leads into the third strategic area, which is jobs, economic development, and opportunity. And we know that we need more jobs for our people that we're educating. A new statistic between January 2020 last year and January 21, in the 18 counties, we lost 5.3% employment versus the state's average of 4.4%. That translates to 4,000 people who lost their jobs in Western North Carolina versus what if we had been at the state average. So we need to work on ways to have jobs right here in Western North Carolina for our people. And the last focus area for the Dogwood Health Trust is health and wellness. And we need to have fewer barriers to quality health care, and especially prevention services and wellness. And so we at the Dogwood Health Trust have begun this work through granting and funding affordable housing and many different aspects of these areas, including one that is very important to Western North Carolina, which is broadband access, looking at how that underpins all of the areas that we're focusing on. And then through all of this work, we have a thread on equity, and that includes racial and ethnicity, as well as differently abled, and inequities in economics. And we know that there are many inequities, economic inequities in our Western region. So we know that this will be generational work. We are excited to share that on April 1st, we will have a new portal open for people to initiate the conversation with Dogwood about funding opportunities. So I encourage you to keep an eye out for that. And we know that together, we all can create a Western North Carolina where everyone can live, learn, earn, and thrive. So it's delighted to be with you today, and I really look forward to hearing what our panelists have to say.
Okay, so now we get into the panel discussion and a few logistical things so the panelists know what's going on. We have, we're going to hear from each panelist individually, but we only have 3 lapel mics. So when the first 3 are done, we'll bring Peg and Patrick up, and 2 of you can move over to their chairs, and you'll have to trade mics. After you've each spoken, we will do a Q&A, at which point we'll have to use the mic down there, or you can pass your lapel mic if you're comfortable. We're just going to wing it, and I'm sure we can make it happen. Okay? All right. So we are here to discuss closing the health coverage gap. Yes? What? Oh, yes, sir.
Your mic on, because I barely can hear.
We are not miking the room because all of the mic is going into the live stream where the majority of our viewers are watching. So I will speak up. Okay, yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir, I will. Okay. We are here to discuss closing the health coverage gap. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to frame that. The coverage gap refers to individuals who do not qualify for Medicaid because they earn too much to qualify, but who make too little money to qualify for a subsidy in the private insurance marketplace or to be able to afford health insurance coverage on their own. So for a parent to qualify for Medicaid in North Carolina, they would need to make less than 42% of the federal poverty line. For context, a single mom with one child, that's around $7,200 a year. So someone working 40 hours a week at minimum wage is making more than twice that amount, so not eligible for Medicaid. Not making nearly enough to qualify for a subsidy in the private insurance marketplace. So for example, a 35-year-old person working full-time minimum wage job in our region to purchase the least expensive marketplace plan without a subsidy is about $400 a month or $4,800 a year, which is about a third of their annual salary. And that plan has around an $8,000 deductible. Also, a non-disabled adult with no children cannot qualify for Medicaid at any income level. But if they make anything less than the federal poverty line, they also cannot qualify for a subsidy. So they are also in what we refer to as the coverage gap. For a personal example of falling in the gap, Brittany Lofthouse has agreed to share a family story.
So I know that we're going to hear from the experts, and we're going to focus on the economic impact of closing the healthcare coverage gap in North Carolina. I know that they're going to do an excellent job talking about that aspect of it, but I wanted to put a face to what it looks like for someone who falls in that coverage gap currently in North Carolina. It isn't the deadbeat that's laying on his couch at home, too lazy to work, or the girl who's losing their job because she can't seem to ever make it in on time. The type of North Carolinian closing the health care gap through legislation such as the North Carolina Health Care for Working Families that was introduced in the House last year are North Carolinians like my dad, Jim Burns. My dad worked his entire life to provide for our family, and I know that I might be a little bit biased, but I think he did a pretty good job raising me and my three sisters. He was a small business owner, owning a half a dozen businesses with countless employees during my lifetime. When I was 10 or 11, he owned the full-service gas station in downtown Silva that's now Innovation Brewing. Before that, a carpet store in Whittier that did commercial jobs. One job in particular I remembered is when he and his staff recarpeted the entirety of the Fontana Village Resort. He always worked. He always had a job, right up until about 2 weeks before he died from liver cancer. A job that he was fired from because he was in the hospital. My dad isn't just the face of the type of person that closing the health care coverage gap would help. It's so much more than that. I wholeheartedly believe that had North Carolina expanded Medicaid when the opportunity first arose in 2010, my dad might have a fighting chance at life. At the beginning of 2013, my dad started to have knee pain. Working 2 jobs, he couldn't afford to take off to rest, and with no health insurance, he had no other option but to work through the pain. He took a couple of ibuprofen and kept working. In a few days, his knee pain turned into stomach pain, so he took a few more ibuprofen. He started to get sick, and he couldn't eat anything, and he'd throw up everything. But he kept working because he had no other choice. One night after a family dinner to celebrate my parents' 28th wedding anniversary, the pain became too much and he went to the emergency room. After waiting for several hours, he was finally seen and was told that he was just fine. He was given medicine to help with his nausea and sent home, and he went back to work. But over the next few days, the pain got worse. He could eat less and less and had started losing weight rapidly. The next Friday, he went back to Silva's emergency room, doubled over in pain. They gave him an IV because he was dehydrated, and they gave him some more nausea meds and sent him home. Why would they send home a man obviously sick? Well, he had no health insurance. Now, I want to be clear, it's not the hospital's fault. They treated him everything that they could have done. It's a broken system, it's not the hospital's fault. They did a phenomenal job with what the resources that they had. By Sunday, he was in so much pain that he drove himself to Asheville, where he was immediately admitted. After a series of tests, they diagnosed my dad with severe pancreatitis and discovered that his stomach was full of ulcers. Not only did he have ulcers, the ulcers that were caused by the ibuprofen the doctor had told him to take, but the ulcers were rupturing and bleeding out into his stomach, a far different diagnosis than the just fine he got the day before. Doctor started treatment and tried to manage his pain, and once he was able to eat food and keep it down and became stable, he was sent home. It would cost too much for him to stay in the hospital because he didn't have health insurance. When he got home, he slept a lot, but the pain quickly came back, and so did the nausea and vomiting. While he laid in bed sick, his boss called and told him that since he'd missed a week of work while in the hospital, he had lost his job. Just another blow. By the following Friday, he was doubled over in pain and found himself back in the emergency room. This time, even though they knew that he was diagnosed with pancreatitis in Asheville, they told him there was nothing they could do and he needed to call his family doctor. They sent him home. On Sunday, he drove to another hospital, hoping that somebody would take pity on him. They were able to come up with their own diagnosis of pancreatitis, but before they treated him, they found out he was in Sylvan the night before, and they sent him home and told him to follow up with his family doctor. When he called his family doctor on Monday, they were booked solid and couldn't make time to see him. Did you know that doctor's office can reserve a specific number of appointments for people without insurance? They didn't have an appointment for him that day. My mom drove him to Asheville, where he was once again admitted, and his doctors apologized and told him that he should have never been discharged. On Thursday, nearly a month after his first doctor's visit, a simple MRI found that my dad's liver was completely consumed with cancer. I imagine by now you can guess why nobody else had done an MRI before then. The cost would have been astronomical without insurance. The doctor started to treat him, but they found that the right quadrant was covered in masses, as was the left. And the tracks connecting his liver to his other organs in his body were also covered, showing signs that the cancer was spreading. Doctors gave him about 4 to 6 months to live. I was at work when I got that call. I was 24 years old. I was expecting my first child due that May, which meant I was about 8 months pregnant with my first child and my dad's first grandson. I answered the phone and was told to come to the hospital because they finally found out what was wrong and he didn't have much more time. The only thing I could think about was that my son was never going to meet his grandpa. Devastation does not even begin to explain it. Just a week after we got word of his diagnosis, doctor changed his 4 to 6 months to just a few more days. They took him off of all of his IVs, he stopped eating, and then we just had to wait. 8 months pregnant and all, I slept on that hospital room floor every single night, praying that God would let my dad hang on long enough to meet my son. Now, 8 years later, I know how selfish that prayer was. I wanted him to stay in pain just for my sake, but it would have meant the world to me. April 2nd will mark 8 years since my dad died. If my dad, a 55-year-old mountain of a man, had gotten health care and health insurance when North Carolina was first able to expand Medicaid in 2010, I don't think that he would have been putting off going to the doctor for his knee pain. I don't think he would have been worried about how he was going to pay for the doctor for his annual checkups. Closing the health care gap would have simply given my dad and families across North Carolina the dignity of having access to literal life-saving health care. Not only would health care have likely caught my dad's cancer before it was too late, but then it would have allowed my family to seek treatment instead of just spending 2 weeks waiting for him to die, because at that point it was simply too late. So if you take anything else away from the things that you hear today, I ask you to do this one very simple thing for me. As you have conversations with others about what closing the health care coverage gap looks like, about expanding Medicaid in North Carolina, I know that there's disagreements. I know that there's stigmas attached to it. I read an article this week where someone opposing Medicaid in North Carolina said that closing the health care coverage gap would cause an undue dependence for able-bodied men. My dad was an able-bodied man who worked every day of his life. I just ask that when you're having those conversations about the type of people that closing the health care coverage gap would look like in North Carolina, that you remember people like my dad. Please understand that it's working families in North Carolina that it would help.
You're right, Dad.
It would be people like my dad, hardworking, loving, kind grandpas that still deserve to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany, for sharing your personal experience. It's a story that unfortunately we hear too often. Next, we'll hear from our panelists. I'm not going to give you a time limit, but do keep in mind that we have 5 of you and we have about an hour left scheduled for the event, and we have some other folks we want to hear from and some time for Q&A. So we're trying to cram a lot of information into the next hour and 15 minutes. We're going to start with Casey Cooper, CEO of the Cherokee Indian Hospital, who will speak on the impact to rural hospitals, including his own.
Thank you, Sarah. I had things that I wanted to say, but before I get started, I just wanted to thank Brittany for sharing that story with us, and for honoring us with that personal story, Brittany. I know that was tough, and I was a little stuck when you were sharing your story. Yesterday, I got to celebrate my dad's 82nd birthday, and he's a really healthy guy, and I can't imagine what it would be like to not have him, and I can't imagine what it would be like if he hadn't seen my kids. So I want to thank you for sharing. I want to spend a minute to talk to you about the impact of closing the coverage gap on small rural hospitals, and I want to talk a little bit, if I can, about the adverse effect that failing to close the coverage gap is having on the eastern band of the Cherokee Indians and on western North Carolina. First of all, I won't bore you with these statistics. Everybody who has followed this conversation at all knows that small rural hospitals operate every year on razor-thin margins. Too many small rural hospitals in North Carolina have closed. Many of them have tried to survive by becoming affiliated with larger health systems, and all of this is because those razor-thin margins are the result of having to serve a large proportion of uncompensated members of their populations. So small rural hospitals do all that they can. They decrease their cost structures, they try to maximize their revenue, but at the end of the day, you still have to see a certain number of insured patients to cover the cost of the uninsured patient that you see. We all know that. And closing the coverage gap, increasing the proportion of covered lives, will have a significantly improved and marked effect on small rural hospitals. What I want to talk to you about most of all today is the adverse effect that this is having directly on the eastern band of the Cherokee Indians. Today, the eastern band of the Cherokee Indians is funding the federal government's trust responsibility to American Indians and Alaska Natives. The delivery of healthcare services to American Indians and Alaska Natives is the legal and moral obligation of the federal government, and it is rooted in more than 22 treaties between tribes across the country and the federal government, and then it is supported by a long list of federal statutes, including the Snyder Act in the 1920s, the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act of 1974, the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act, all the way up to the Affordable Care Act. The federal government has acknowledged time and time again through statute its legal and moral obligation to provide health care to Indians as recompense for the atrocities that happened. So American Indians and Alaska Natives have the first pre-purchased health plan in this country, but unfortunately for more than 100 years it continues to be horribly underfunded. As a matter of fact, the latest research shows that the Indian Health Service is funded at about 50% of the level of need. The funding for Indian Health Service is about $4,000 per capita. And you guys have seen the data. We've all seen the data. We know that the U.S. All averages is well above $9,000. We've seen some Medicare data that shows the per capita spending is well above $12,000. But yet the Indian Health Service is only funded at $4,000 per capita. The United States Congress acknowledged this, and they acknowledged the problem that the Indian Health Service is discretionary spending. It is not an entitlement program like Medicaid and Medicare. So the United States Congress has tried to patch this together over the years. And there are two significant things Congress did in the 70s. There were two amendments to the Social Security Act to try to patch this problem. The first was Congress made it possible for Indian health systems in this country to bill Medicaid and Medicare and get reimbursed for the services delivered as an attempt to bridge that funding gap. The second thing that Congress did, because of the adverse effect that this was having on states, is it passed a second amendment that guarantees 100% federal match to states for the delivery of health care services to American Indians and Alaska Natives when they receive their care through a tribal system. There's a 100% federal match. So the failure to expand Medicaid in North Carolina is costing the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians more than $7 million a year. Just most conservative estimates, we believe that there are about 1,000 people that would immediately be eligible for Medicaid if we expanded. And those 1,000 people would represent about $7 million a year. That is healthcare services that are already being provided to our people because the Eastern Band has made the decision to fund its healthcare system. The Eastern Band just completed a $50 million continuum of behavioral health and substance abuse services and provides a direct appropriation on an annual basis to fund these much-needed services for folks that would otherwise be qualified for Medicaid. $7 million a year. And that's $7 million a year that the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians could put into housing, infrastructure development, broadband, economic development in Western North Carolina, creating more jobs. But unfortunately, we're not able to do that because the tribe is forced to fund the federal government's legal and moral obligation to the tribe as a result of a policy decision not to close the coverage gap. We desperately need to close this coverage gap in North Carolina. The small rural hospitals in North Carolina are absolutely dependent on it, and the Eastern Band desperately needs for North Carolina to pass a policy that stops this annual economic harm to the tribe. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Casey. Next, we'll hear from Dale Wiggins, Graham County Board of Commissioners, speaking on the economic impact to his constituents.
The Medicaid expansion issue for me is not one of statistics. Gosh, I'm tongue-tied. Statistics. That's a big word. I should practice before I speak. So what I try to do is put this on a human level, because really that's what it comes down to. It's about human beings. I'm very thankful that we're here today to discuss this subject, because it's very important to each and every one of us, to every county across this state. Our health is at stake, especially the health of those people without health insurance. For me, my own health may be at stake today because today's my wife's birthday and I'm here with you people instead of spending my day with her celebrating her birthday. That's how important this is for me. When I spoke to her and told her that we were going to have to change our plans for today, I told her I would skip this meeting. Her reply to me was, we'll do it on Saturday because this is important. And it is important. I met a few weeks ago with Casey, Swain County Commission Chairman Ben Bushyhead. We had a great meeting. We got to see this wonderful facility that Casey and the EBCI folks have put together over there. It's an amazing facility. They are very blessed to have that. And I learned that there's even a way for people that are non-tribal members to actually benefit for that, but if we can meet the criteria. And one of those, maybe the most important criteria, is the ability to pay. A lot of people don't have that ability. As I left that meeting after talking with them, I had a lot to think about. I left there with a lot to think about. And when I face difficult times and difficult decisions, I like to refer to the scriptures and try to find the answer that I'm looking for there. And after speaking with them, I thought about the life of Jesus. Because in our world, we have to put prerequisites on everything if we're going to do something for somebody. But Jesus was known for traveling around, doing miracles, healing lame people, causing blind people to see. Can you imagine if he was in our world today and had the same approach that we have to health care? If somebody walked up to him in a crowd and said, hey, my family member's sick, could you take a look at him? Can you see Jesus walking over to somebody that's sick and saying, do you have a job? If you would just get a better job, you could have health insurance. But we've learned that that's not the reality of it. Lots of people work every day without insurance. Another thing that he might say if somebody posed that question to him, he might say, you're not one of those Pharisee guys, are you? Because we can't be doing miracles for Pharisees. See, we want to choose whom we do this for or that for. And we have to have these prerequisites all the time that we put in front of us that just create stumbling blocks. When I talked with Ben and Casey a couple of weeks back, I told them I didn't have a real issue with this expansion possibly having a work component. But after hearing Ben Bushyhead's response to that, I had to go home and think about it. Because I found that I was one of those people at times. And then I thought about the book of Leviticus in chapter 19, where it talks about people with resources, people that own farms and vineyards, and God speaks to them and tells them, don't harvest the fields in the corners of the fields. Don't take all the grapes. Don't glean the fields after you're done. And why would he have that done? Because there are people, for one reason or another, that cannot afford certain things in life. The first thing we want to do is judge those people. Oftentimes, wrongfully, we assume this or that about someone, but we are usually wrong. I can assure you, I know lots of people that go to work every day, especially in the construction field, and in my county, that's a lot of people. Some of them work 70, 80 hours a week. They still don't have insurance. The difference in us is, in Jesus Christ, is that we set those prerequisites. That landowner that God said, don't take all that stuff out of your field, he never saw the people. He never knew the people that came and benefited from them. But he left it for them anyway. And I believe that kind of rule of thumb, love thy neighbor, I think those same words apply to us today. As part of the Governor's Healthcare Council, we learned a lot. We had a lot of information that we had to digest. We learned about other states that had implemented Medicaid expansion already. We learned about the state of Georgia and how wrong they did it. That was one of the most confusing things. I can't imagine how they ever expect that to work. But we also learned, too, about states like Ohio. We learned about states like Kentucky and Montana that have done a good job. We learned that even in Ohio, their studies reveal that people are more inclined to seek employment if they have health care. It opens numerous positions that maybe they never even thought about taking. Medicaid expansion will allow people the ability to have health care. I can think of nothing more important. 13 years ago this month, at this exact time, I was trying to complete a regimen of 38 radiation treatments for cancer in my neck. I never have once had to worry about how I would pay for those treatments because I had health insurance. I had good health insurance. It's bad enough when the doctor looks at you and says you have cancer. That's enough of a burden to have to bear without having to worry about how in the world am I going to pay for these treatments. My radiation treatments I took over in Clyde. My health insurance allowed me to go down to UNC Chapel Hill Hospital, see some of the best oncologists in the country. They found for me a radiation oncologist over in Clyde that was ranked in the top 100 in the United States because I had health insurance. My treatments were $1,400 each. I paid $40 out of pocket. I had health insurance. Without the insurance, that part of my treatment alone would have cost me over $53,000. We would have had to consider selling our home or taking out a loan to pay for my medical bills, a loan that we would today still be trying to repay. My whole experience with cancer and the associated surgeries cost over $100,000. That was 13 years ago. Can you imagine what it would cost today? I would have survived, I guess, as far as selling our home, and we might have gone to a renter instead of a homeowner. We heard from Brittany's story what the consequences could be without insurance. The impact on counties across this state from Medicaid expansion is significant. In Region A alone, there are an estimated 12,000 people that have no health insurance. In my little county, Graham County, we have an estimated 600 people who work every day. They either earn too much money for the Affordable Care Act, and they can't afford to go buy insurance on the open market. The single largest expense item in our county budget is health insurance for our 186 employees. We spend on average $8,400 a year per employee. $1.562 million a year to provide health insurance for 186 people. That's the equivalent of 15 cents of our property tax millage rate. We only have about 28% of the land in our county that's even taxable. The rest of it is primarily owned by the federal government. Swain County, our neighbor, is even smaller with probably less than 15% of their land that's even taxable. If we had Medicaid expansion today, we might see almost immediately an 11% reduction in insurance premiums. That would give our small county almost $200,000 a year that we could use for important projects or services. To us, every job that we create in Graham County or see created is precious. Even in great economic times, we often have the highest unemployment rate in the state of North Carolina. We believe that we would see up to 12 jobs created in the medical field. Swain County, our neighbor, has around 1,100 people without health insurance. Those people work every day. They're in maybe the hospitality industry, or the people that are bagging your groceries at the grocery store, or serving you your food at the fast food outlet, or any restaurant for that matter. It may be the electrician that's wiring your house. It may be the plumber that's fixing that leaking pipe. Could be the carpenter, the guy at the auto body shop that's working on your car. We think across the region that we could see potentially 550 new jobs in the medical field. One group that often gets overlooked when we think about health insurance is veterans. We have, I think, around 23 to 24,000 veterans across this state that have no insurance, and they don't qualify for VA benefits. We have spent for a lot of years around us and around our region here recruiting doctors, FNPs, PAs, all the people necessary to treat you if you got sick. But I can tell you, if you have a doctor on every block, if you don't have the money to pay the doctor bill, it's not going to matter to you. You're not going to get the services that you need. In our small county, we have people that use our ambulance base to come get their blood pressure checked, to get their blood glucose checked, other minor health insurance issues. We see our ambulances called out to act as basically an emergency room on wheels. These things are expensive. We've taken grant money in Graham County and paid for medical equipment so that our citizens can have more care in county. But no matter what we do as county government to provide access, we cannot pay the doctor bills for them. The patients who don't have the money still go unseen. Like every other county around us, we have a serious, very serious drug problem. We've gotten grant money in Graham County, and we're trying to create model programs to help the addicted population, not just in our county, but across the region, rebuild their lives. But there's one important thing that we won't be able to provide for them, and that's health care. They're going to need a lot of health care. That's very personal for me. My oldest son is an addict, and it breaks my heart every day. And he needs help, and I can't give him everything that he needs. And he's not alone. We've had 5 drug overdoses in our county this week, 1 fatality. It's time to act. The time for Medicaid expansion is way past due. I hope that this year that our elected officials will do what I believe is the right thing and pass the legislation that will expand Medicaid in this state. Our people, I believe, that work every day, they deserve it. They're working hard. And if we can give countries like Egypt $1.4 billion a year in foreign aid, then I believe my neighbor can get some medical help if he needs it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiggins. Next, we'll hear from Commissioner Ronnie Beal from Macon County on the impact on county budgets as well as the mental health crisis. Commissioner Beal.
Well, can everybody hear me okay? Can you see me okay? Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about your panelists that you don't know. Casey Cooper on the end is more than a CEO of a hospital. He's been active in mental health in our region for years, I know for a fact. He's worked tirelessly for the mental health, not only for the Eastern Band, but for our general populations. This commissioner sitting to my left has been the leader in wanting to expand Medicaid in the far west 7 counties and all over our state. They see what we see. You heard Brittany's story. So today we're here for more than just to give you numbers and talk to our legislators. There's nothing more important. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Well, I'm here to tell you we've been in an epidemic for years in mental health, in jails, in the typical health care of our citizens, not only in the far west, but in our state. My former colleagues, Representative Gillespie and Senator Corbin, they know where my stance is on mental health and have always been very supportive of such and of those programs. And I think we have a golden opportunity, gentlemen, to pass Medicaid expansion. We thank the Southwest Commission and the SCC, the Rural Center, and those folks for coming today. If you take nothing else from what any of us say, I think we're all in agreement that when you hear Dale Wiggins talk, it's not just politics. It comes from the heart. And that's what Medicaid expansion is. I mean, it should be out of politics. We've got to somehow get beyond that. It's held up a budget. Medicaid expansion is the reason North Carolina don't have a budget. The governor released his budget this week. So we've got to do better and got to do more. But I do want to talk about the two things I was asked to, and that's inmate populations and the cost of it to counties and the mental health and how they intertwine. When you talk about one, you cannot talk about one without talking about the other. Talk about jails for a minute. On any given day in North Carolina, there's about 68 to 75,000 incarcerated in our prisons today. Out of that, about 20% of those are in county jails. The rest of them are at either lower percentage, about 11% in federal jails, and the rest in state prisons. It costs the county statewide per year, just for the medical care for those inmates, around $58 million a year. Now, what does that mean for Macon County? Well, I've got to every county in a pamphlet here if you'd like to see it, but for Macon County, as Carl and Kevin continue, it's one of our huge expenses. From 2017 through 2020, we spent about $1.2 million on medical for our inmates. This year alone, in the 8 months of this year period, since our fiscal year, of course, starts in July, until the end of February, we have spent almost $400,000 this year. We estimate we'll end up spending closer to $550,000 or $600,000 this year. You hear Commissioner Wiggins talk about ad valorem tax. Ad valorem tax in Macon County, a penny, is about $750,000. So now, the Macon County taxpayer is going to be paying that 1 cent of their ad valorem, which could go to many, many things, for jail inmate care. And you got to remember, regardless of whatever jail they end up at, they're going to start at your local jail. Regardless if they end up at Raleigh Central. And nobody's ever been to Raleigh Central, make an appointment and go. Everybody needs to go one time. Hopefully not to stay. But you need to go see Raleigh Central and the mental health sections they have in Raleigh Central Prison and what it costs. It costs more to incarcerate a mental health patient in Raleigh Central than it does to send a student to North Carolina University. So why is that important to Medicaid expansion? Medicaid expansion has the provision about local governments and how it can help and how it can help in our jails and what it can do for our prisoners in the jails. Prisons have become our treatment centers for mental health. Jails have become everything. That's where you go. And you got to remember, when these people get out of jail or they get out of wherever, they don't disappear. They don't just go away. You're going to see them again. They will come back. They're either going to be homeless, they're going to end up in your ER. They will be back because there's no treatment for the mental health aspect in our jails, which is estimated that over 60% of those incarcerated have some type of mental illness. And now what we're seeing as they come in, the people off the street, and yes, we're in the middle of COVID-19, and yes, but the general health condition of the people who's coming into the jail, the quality of their health care has been nil. Their health is poorer than you'd expect, but it's up to the county's responsibility. He might be incarcerated, and especially through this past COVID, that person might be incarcerated in a local prison for months, if not years, before their trial. Guess who's footing that bill? So that's what we're seeing in jails across counties, and we're seeing that expense continue to grow. And that's just one reason why Medicaid expansion. Now to talk about the mental health aspect and how it connects everybody. I'm going to make a statement, and you're going to visualize in your mind when I get through making the statement who it is. Every family. This is the only thing that affects every family. It don't matter if you're in this room, if you're listening. In this state, mental illness, substance abuse affects every family. And in your mind right now, if you're in this room, if you're listening, you can visualize that person, and that's had an effect on your family. I'll assure you right now, you can write their name down. I've had the opportunity to speak about this subject all over the state. I don't know if it's done any good, but I build houses for a living. I'm not an expert on anything, really. But I can tell you this, there's nothing more important. If you're not mentally well, you're not going to be physically well. Wellness starts with being mentally well. So where do we stand with mental health in North Carolina? Well, to be frankly honest, we're not gaining on mental health at all. Mental health, a matter of fact, that it is still the #1 health crisis in our state by far. It surpasses COVID-19 like it's backing up. There's nothing that compares to mental health substance abuse problems and the money it costs local governments and costs our local taxpayers. Medicaid expansion, of course, those of us who have been on that bandwagon for a long time and been to these other states, I think you heard Commissioner Wiggins mention Ohio. I think Kevin Corbin and I and several others were in Ohio, who had the worst opioid crisis probably of any state. We went to places where they didn't have bodies, they had morgues with names on them. We saw that. So what does it mean, and what could Medicaid expansion do for mental health? #1, the jail is not a very good treatment facility. But Dale Wiggins is right. Some of us have made steps to try to do things in our jail. We have a program at home called No Wrong Door. Something similar to what Graham County, Connie Orr and Dale Wiggins and myself and others have worked on other programs, because it's going to end up being local. We are working on peer-to-peer support. But the bottom line is these folks have got to have, and almost none of them have health insurance. Let's just be honest. They're destitute. They're either addicted, have mental health problems, and you don't have to, everybody thinks mental health and that stigma of it. My goal in life, if I don't accomplish nothing else, and I better hurry, I think, is to one of these days see a flyer posted on the wall that says we're having a benefit tonight for Ronnie Bill, who's suffering from mental illness. There's going to be a cake walk. We're going to auction off cakes. We're going to do all this other stuff. You'll never see that flyer, folks, until we realize what disease we're dealing with and how we can pay for it. We can dodge it all we want to. We can put the stigma of it. Well, it's all their fault. It's not their fault. It's until it took me a long time too, folks, to realize that it is a disease that we've got to deal with. Dale Wiggins can tell you a local story about his family. You heard about his son. He can tell you an even worse story about that in his family. That would be up to Dale to tell you that, and he will. Ronnie Bill can tell you about his family and the mental illness that went through his family and that he can't pay for the bill. And it's in every family. So Medicaid expansion is the first step to recognize what a huge, huge problem mental illness is and continues to be and will be in the future. But I do want to mention some numbers. You can't get through without numbers. If we can close the gap, you heard about the 13,000 that would get coverage. The total jobs created out of that would be about 600 in our area. Business activity, about 85 million. This is in the 7 far west counties alone. The county revenues, see about a $1.5 million. And those are just some numbers. Are they just numbers? No, those are data That's taken from the 38 states who have Medicaid expansion. So we talk about LME, MCOs, local managed entities, and managed care organizations in North Carolina, which are 7. They spent $359 million to serve 101 uninsured individuals. That's about 52,000, and we have a lot of those here, but we have a lot of those who are in that gap, who cannot get, they earn too much money, they can't afford where they would place in Obamacare, so they're in that gap, and that's why we're here today. More than 1.5 North Carolinians over the age of 18 has a mental illness, and 1 in 5 don't receive no service. That is not going to go away. I mean, we don't want to face that. That's a huge stigma. But it's not going to disappear. It's always going to be with us. It's always going to cost money. But there are things we can do. Let's talk a minute about suicide. Suicide is still the leading cause of injury death in North Carolina. Suicide. And they talked about veterans that don't have insurance, the veteran suicide. Macon County is one of 5 counties in the nation that was chosen to help develop a suicide prevention program for veterans. Why? Because about 12% of our population in Macon County are veterans. And that's just one of the reasons. So we are working on that. We are coming up, but what we're finding out real quick, it takes a veteran to talk to a veteran when it comes to suicide. And the ones that we have been able to talk to have no insurance. They have, and they can't afford the insurance. They can't afford the medications for the PTSD that put them in this situation. We can do better than that. We got to do better than that. I think Medicaid expansion, you can read all this, but here's the one that really is mental health for our children. North Carolina now ranks 42nd or maybe 45th. When you see Mississippi and looking back and see their headlights, you know you're in trouble on anything. But child mental illness is huge. We're about 45th, I think, 43rd or 45th when we run the last numbers on child, and it's becoming. When I was growing up, we didn't recognize that, and now it's in a different time. And their children are facing different circumstances with parenting, with a whole lot of things. We do have mental health in our schools, which we have to pay for. The state pays a little, the county pays most of that. But Medicaid expansion would pick up with our children. And what we're learning by the time they get to middle grade, if you haven't really had a chance for them to get some help, by the time they get in their teen years, it's almost too late. So we're working hard in our high schools and our middle grade schools, but we need help. They don't have no insurance. These families have no insurance. So we could talk on about all the bad things, but please remember, when you go back to Raleigh, the legislators and Senator Corbin, that this is one thing that can help us all. It'll help every North Carolinian. You'll hear all the bad stuff. Oh, it's going to take the working man, and they'll quit their jobs. The employers will drop insurance. That's not what the data shows in the 38 states that has Medicaid expansion. So I think that if you can work hard, we can certainly make a dent, and this will be the first great step into helping those of our most vulnerable population. And remember that these folks aren't leaving. They're not going nowhere. They'll be around again. They'll either be in your ER, they'll be in your sheriff's department, they'll be somewhere. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I thank you for putting this together. I appreciate the Rural Center and the Business Advisory Council and all they do, and thank you for the opportunity, and I think we're going to change our seats. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Beal. Okay, let's do some quick mic switches. Peg and Patrick need mics. What's that? Okay. Yeah. minutes. Okay. Thank you. That's all right. Okay, so next we will hear from Peg O'Connell, Board Chair of Care for Carolina, speaking on the economics of bad health. Thank you, Peg.
Thank you, Sarah. Can Representative Clampett, can you hear me? All right. I am from a large Irish family, and so nobody has ever not heard me. Yes, Celts rule. So I am Peg O'Connell, and I am the chair of Care for Carolina. I don't know that your light is on. Oh, there we go. All right. Good. Sorry. I should be more pro. So I'm the chair of Care for Carolina, and I'm Peg O'Connell. I am first and foremost a public health advocate. My colleagues and I care about what's going to improve and benefit the health of North Carolinians. But before that, I practiced insurance law. My first job was in the legal department of a group health insurance company. That's what they called us before managed care. That was a long time ago, and Senator Corbin, I bet you even remember the days before managed care and group health insurance. But even then, we knew some basic facts. Lack of adequate health insurance is bad for business. Lost productivity cost businesses money. Closing the coverage gap would save businesses $1,685 in lost productivity per employee per year. If you're a small business, that's a lot of money. Higher insurance costs for everyone who has an employee or who's trying to run a business. We know, based on what these gentlemen up here already told us, uncompensated care leads to higher health care costs and health insurance premiums for everyone. When Senator Corbin was in the House, we talked about this a lot, and which is one of the reasons he was a co-sponsor on previous bills that would do something to close the coverage gap. Senator Corbin's one of the largest insurance agents in the state. He sees this every day in his business. Closing the gap will stabilize premiums by reducing these uncompensated care costs. Insurance premiums are like pushing on a balloon. You push in on one side, it bulges out on the other. So if we have a lot of people who are getting expensive care through the emergency rooms, we all end up paying for it. For small business owners and those self-employed who enroll in the private marketplace, their premiums are 11 to 12% lower in states that have closed their coverage gap. In Virginia, where they found a solution to close their gap about a year and a half ago, they've started to see a downward impact on all insurance rates, whether it's in the marketplace, in the group market, or even in the employer-sponsored self-pay plans. This means if we do this, that every person who is health insured, who buys health insurance, whether it's the state employees health plan or Xerox or IBM, their health insurance costs will be less if we do something to close the gap. And a better insured population yields better health outcomes. We know that cancer patients are much less likely to be screened. And if you're much less likely to be screened, you're much less likely to survive your cancer. Patients have a 60% greater chance of dying from their cancer if they're uninsured at the time of their diagnosis. It shouldn't be that way in the United States. And my friends at the American Cancer Society found that the number one factor, and Commissioner Wiggins mentioned this, the number one factor for determining whether you will survive your cancer is if you are insured. We know that our infant mortality and maternal mortality rates are way too high in North Carolina and have been for a long time. One of the reasons is we have so many young women coming into pregnancy without good health. Many of them are not insured. If we can get them insured before they become pregnant, the outcomes for the mom and for the baby will be much better. Providing a longer tail on postpartum care alone doesn't help infant mortality or maternal mortality. And then both Commissioners Beal and Wiggins talked about the opioid epidemic and substance use disorder. I grew up in southeastern Ohio. We're at the top of the Appalachian chain. We are part of Appalachia just like you are. And for some reason, our part of the country, whether you're in the northern part or in the southern part, has struggled mightily with opioid addiction. If we could find a solution to close the coverage gap, there would be a 6% lower rate in opioid overdoses. Generally, a person doesn't overdose their first time, but they could eventually. If we can get them treatment, if we can get them care, they will improve and get better. And people who are uninsured are much less likely to ever get treatment. And that's a sad thing. They found that in my home state of Ohio. By getting folks access to health insurance, they were able to move them out of an opioid and substance abuse disorder, even though that's a tremendously difficult thing to do. And I will leave you with one last health statistic, and then I'll stop talking. The bottom line is the National Bureau of Economic Research estimates that states' failure to close their coverage gap resulted in nearly 16,000 unnecessary deaths in 2019. That's before the impact of the pandemic. And think about this. You may say 16,000 people in a country of almost 330 million, what difference does it make? You know what? That's 12 states that haven't found a solution. Those 16,000 people are people's moms and dads and brothers and sisters, and they're our neighbors. We can do better than this, North Carolina. We can do better than Medicaid expansion in North Carolina. We can close the coverage gap, put our state back on its feet economically, and ensure the health of future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Peg. Finally, we'll hear from Patrick Woody, president of the North Carolina Rural Center, speaking on regional and statewide economic impact.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you on a beautiful day in southwestern North Carolina. Most everything that can be said on this subject has been said, and I'm going to repeat a few things. But I'm going to come at it from a little different perspective, and I come at it from the perspective of the Rural Center, a nonprofit that for 34 years has worked statewide across this state, exclusively focused on economic development in rural North Carolina. How our mission is making the quality of life of the people who live in rural North Carolina better and improving the communities that they call home. And that's what our everyday is about. And we think a lot and we teach a lot and we do a lot of leadership development training around helping our leaders at a local level and emerging leaders in our local communities understand how to create the conditions for economic improvement, economic growth, economic development. And I will tell you that there are many common denominators that are necessary for creating those conditions. And one of the leading ones that if you want to remove the possibility of economic growth, close the local hospital. And we've seen about a dozen of those rural hospitals close across the state over the last decade, way too many. We've seen the effects that has had on those communities and the people living in those communities. And we've seen it shut down the potential for economic development, because that's one of the things that a business is going to look for before they make a decision to invest and to create jobs in a community. They're going to have a checklist. And one of the items on that checklist, real close to the top, right after workforce, is going to be what's the local healthcare delivery system like, and what kind of shape is it in? So as an economic development organization, we really think about those conditions for economic growth, and we understand that healthcare is an incredibly important piece of that economic development puzzle. Now, I want you to imagine that it's a beautiful, sunny Friday afternoon in southwestern North Carolina, and maybe you're Commissioner Wiggins, or maybe you're Commissioner Beal, or maybe you're another county commissioner, or maybe you're a mayor of one of the towns in these 7 counties in southwestern North Carolina. Or maybe you're a county or town manager, or maybe you're one of the economic developers in one of those 7 counties, and you get a call that bright, sunny Friday afternoon from Josh Carpenter with Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. And he says, I've got a prospect that I want to tell you about that's really interested in locating in your region, in the Southwest. And this prospect is an industry that's going to create 558 jobs. They're going to invest $86 million, and they're going to produce county tax revenue of around $1.5 million across that 7-county region. And the reality, as we sit here and talk about that, is that this is not a hypothetical. This is what will happen if we find the courage to close the coverage gap, and if we do the things we need to do to cover the uninsured and make sure that they have the health care coverage they need. The healthcare is not just one of the amenities that a community needs to create the conditions for economic development. It is a major industry in and of itself that's present in every single community. It creates jobs, it provides employment. If we expand Medicaid, all those dollars are going to be introduced into the local economy because people are going to have health care. They're going to go seeking services where those services exist, and they're going to spend those health care dollars, and that's going to generate economic impact. That's going to generate 558 jobs across the region, $86 million in impact across the region, and $1.5 million in county tax revenue to the counties of the region. And 12,393 more individuals are going to be, across these 7 counties, are going to be covered by, are going to have basic health care coverage. That would make this beautiful Friday sunny afternoon complete. Those numbers come from research that was completed by George Washington University School of Public Health. It was commissioned by the Cone Healthcare Foundation based in Greensboro and the Kate B. Reynolds Foundation based in Winston-Salem. It was originally done in 2014. It was updated in late 2019. It is based upon the REMI model of economic impact analysis, which is the leading method of economic impact analysis. It's what our State Department of Commerce uses. It's what our Economic Development Partnership uses to understand what the economic impact of investment means to communities. And so I'm glad to share those numbers with you from what they mean from an economic development perspective and point of view. From a rural North Carolina perspective across this entire state, over the next 3 years, if we decide this year that we're going to close the coverage gap and we're going to expand Medicaid in some way, 37,000 new jobs would be created in this state. $11.7 billion in federal dollars will flow to the state of North Carolina. $500 million in state tax revenue, $100 million in county tax revenue will flow to local governments across over the next 3 years. We won't see taxes raised because we are already paying them, and we've been paying them. Over 600,000 North Carolinians that are currently uninsured would gain insurance coverage. It also benefits every single person who currently has an insurance policy and pays for that insurance. Closing the gap will stabilize premiums by reducing uncompensated care costs. Marketplace premiums in those states that have closed their coverage gaps are 11 to 13% lower after Medicaid expansion than they were before. And let it not escape us that we have a lot of federal resources that are coming at us right now that are going to help us do a lot of good things in this state as we come out of this pandemic and we work to get our economy from one end of this state really working and really humming again. When North Carolina closes the gap, there will be an additional net $1.2 billion that flows to North Carolina over 8 quarters or a 2-year period that will help the state pay for it, not only pay for its 10% share, but I understand have about $300 million in revenue left over after the state has paid its 10% Medicaid match. It's a pretty compelling case. 38 other states have joined those ranks. I understand the state of Wyoming is getting ready to do the same thing. I understand the state of Texas may be getting ready to do the same thing. It is time. It is way past time, and it is incredibly necessary. We are going to have opportunities. Our rural communities are going to have opportunities coming out of this pandemic. I genuinely believe people all across this country and all across this globe are going to think about, they're going to re-examine how they live their lives and where they live their lives. And some of those people are going to decide that in face of the pandemic we've just experienced, they want to live in a smaller place, a more rural place, a less populated place. And those places that are poised and have the conditions and the quality of life that families are looking for are going to see the benefits of that. And this step of Medicaid expansion is one of the things we have to do to make sure those conditions exist so that we can take advantage of it in rural North Carolina. And when it comes to Southwestern North Carolina, there's not a rural region of this state that I am more bullish on than Southwestern North Carolina. If you just look at where you sit in the geography on the eastern seaboard and what you are in proximity to, the number of people, the number of markets, it is incredible. It is a Garden of Eden on the East Coast with a quality of life that is incredible. And by the way, you've even had the foresight to develop the outdoor recreation industry as one of the ways that you're diversifying your economy and creating new opportunities in investing by building upon your greatest asset, and that is the beauty and the natural resources of this region. It's a pleasure to be with you. I am absolutely honored and humbled to share the panel with the folks that you've already heard from. I have seen Dale Wiggins in venues across this state where he is driven from Graham County to Lee County to Raleigh to parts all over this state to speak from the heart about what he knows to be true for the people he represents. And I know Ronnie does the same thing for the people that he represents. And to our 3 legislators, I ask you humbly, now's the time. We need to do this. This is the year, and we need to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. For the sake of time, we want to give our special guests an opportunity to make any closing comments. We are nearing 5 o'clock. So starting with you, Senator Corbin, if you'd like to, we do have a mic here, or you may come to the podium. And then we'll hear from our 2 representatives if you choose to make comments. And Chief Sneed, if you would like to make comments, we'd love to hear from you too. So if you'll just follow each other up after you make comments, and then we'll conclude today's session.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me? Thank you for this discussion. Thank you for the panel. Thank you, Sarah, Brittany, all the ones that put this together. Peg mentioned a moment ago that in the legislature last session, I actually was one of the sponsors on the bill to expand Medicaid. I think one of the fears of some of my colleagues, I'm bad to just tell it like it is, and I do that to my own demise sometimes, but is that their base of support will not support this. They're kind of frightened of that, and I've shared with some of my colleagues this, that you guys know. In this last election cycle, it was very obvious that I sponsored the bill to expand Medicaid. The headline in most of the papers in Western North Carolina said, Corbin supports Medicaid expansion. And I'm happy for a lot, not just me, but our campaign folks. I'm speaking from the campaign side now. We had a primary and a general election that we won handily. It did not hurt me. And I've got one of the most conservative districts in the state of North Carolina. So I don't buy that argument, but sometimes it's hard to convince your colleagues of that. As far as what we're doing moving forward, I appreciate the comments about mental health, Ronnie. I'm going to put it like this, until we treat mental health like cancer or diabetes, it's not going to get better, because the stigma of mental health that we don't want to talk about, we've got to get over that. We've got to fund it. There's two parts of treatment, and Ronnie, you and I have had this conversation so many times. There's detox. That's wonderful. You detox somebody for a few days, they go by and buy more drugs or alcohol on their way home. That's what happens in reality. They need rehab, which is a long term. 30 days is a minimal time. We need facilities to do that. Mike Clampett has introduced a bill in the House to fund $50 million toward a mental health facility. Mike and I talked about that. Do we think that's going to be funded immediately? Probably not, but we want to start that ball rolling. We want to start that conversation because we've got to address mental health. Now, as far as, I don't want to take too long, but as far as moving forward, I've been, as Peg knows, we've been working on this year, and I've found one of my colleagues in the Senate that's as interested as I am as trying to make a dent in this. His name is Jim Bergen. Jim Bergen is from Harnett County, down in the eastern part of the state. So Jim Bergen and I have already filed a bill in the Senate. It's kind of it's not a trick, but it's a method. The time to get a bill to bill drafting in the Senate passed almost 2 weeks ago. So we did what we call a placeholder. We placed a bill that doesn't really mean anything. It's got our name on it, and we're going to insert language about Medicaid. And we're going to, matter of fact, I looked on my calendar. Peg, you'll find this interesting. And Cindy in Raleigh does my scheduling. And I'm looking, okay, what have I got this week? Tuesday, Peg O'Connell, 2:30 in my office this week. So we're going to have that conversation. We're going to decide what we can do. Let me explain, being a legislator is a little bit different than being a county commissioner, as Carl Gillespie has found out. And when you're a county commissioner, and all of our counties out here have 5 county commissioners, literally all you have to do is talk 2 people into agreeing with you, and you can do anything. Those county commissioners' power, 3 county commissioners can do almost anything as long as it's not illegal or immoral to do. In the legislature, it's a more cumbersome process. You have to convince 61 House members. You have to convince 26 senators and the governor to all agree on the same thing. And that's a heavy lift. To give you an idea how hard that is, last session there were 1,100 bills introduced. There were 150 that made it through. So a little over 10% make it through. What Jim Bergen and I hope to do, and we're going to talk with Peggy, she knows where we're going with this. We're going to put in a bill what we think we can get passed. Now, the last time we introduced full Medicaid expansion. It did not pass. We're not sure if we can get that through this time. We're working on that. We've got that bill as a placeholder. We're going to introduce something to expand Medicaid. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. If I knew it, I would tell you now. For example, a woman who has a baby has Medicaid for, is it 2 months? 2 months after that baby's born. We are going to put in that bill that young lady will have insurance for 2 years after that. And we're also going to put a provision in there that allows for the state to pay for community college education during that same period of time. So we believe that most people want to help themselves. We believe that most people want to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and do better. And we're going to try to do what we can to help that. And we're going to continue to have those conversations. feel free to call me. My number, for those of you watching or here, my phone number in Raleigh is 919-733-5875, and I'd be happy to talk to you at any point. And again, I don't know exactly where this is going. If I knew, I would tell you. But we're going to do all we can to cover as many people as we can with legislation this year, and we will be introducing that bill sometime in the next 2 weeks. So, thank you guys.
Looks like we have Representative Clampett coming to the podium.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for members, and appreciate Southwestern putting this on this afternoon. As Senator Corbin mentioned a minute ago about the mental health, I am part of a DWI task force in Western North Carolina, and the task force, in that we have recognized some of the real problems with mental health. You touched on it about the jails, etc. That's why I have a $50 million bill introduced. As Senator Corbin says, that's a heavy lift. That's a large appropriation. But the thing about it is, sometimes we do these kinds of things to draw attention to a real problem. And this is a real problem for mental health for the 7 western counties. And when I say 7 western counties, the true Western North Carolina is from Balsam west, Haywood County west. We don't really have here in Western North Carolina a real mental health facility to take and address abuse abatement. We don't have a real facility to address PTSD. We don't have a real facility to be supportive of Department of Corrections and those people that are involuntary incarcerated because of mental health issues, etc. So because of that and the work with the task force and the recognition that mental health affects everyone with substance abuse, etc., or abuse abatement, I introduced that bill. Now, I've been very fortunate. So far, I've had one of the major providers in the healthcare industry contact me a week ago today after he saw the bill was introduced to call and get more information about that. That's bringing some of the players and stakeholders to the table. And that's what I want to do, is get the stakeholders and players to the table so that we can proceed, positively on this. It may happen, it may not happen, but as Senator Corbin said, with a heavy lift, we have several different committees that all bills must go through and be vetted, et cetera, to be able to do that. This attention that we're bringing to it, it's not just me, it's Senator Corbin and others. We recognize of the mental health issues that we're having, and it is statewide. If you look at the geography of North Carolina, the center part of the state is saturated with mental health facilities. What does the East Coast and Western North Carolina not have? Mental health facilities. And this is one way that I'm bringing more attention to this, and hopefully we'll get more traction with it. And, I encourage people's support. I encourage, since you're talking to Senator Corbin next week, anything you can give me informational-wise helps me when I go, and I am on the Appropriations Committee. Now, I understand, too, anything that passes the House has to go over to Senate, to Senate Corbin's side, and then he is my go-to person, since we're from the area together, to run my bill over there. And then the same goes from the Senate side to the House. When it comes over from the Senate side, Representative Gillespie and myself, since we're in the western part, we take and we'll do that for Senator Corbin on that. Right now, North Carolina and western part has got it the best they've ever had with the representation that we have. And when I say the best, you've got Senator Corbin. He and I were freshmen together 5 years ago in 16. We have that working relationship, and it's proved out well for Western North Carolina. Right now, we have Representative Pless of I share Haywood County with, Representative Gillespie, and myself. We've got, when I say we, you have 4 legislators that work together, and we communicate just about daily on any event. I get to see Gillespie and Pless on the House floor every day. I don't get to see Senator Corbin quite as often, but we are on quick call and texting from time to time about stuff. So that way, when I say that, that's a good thing to be able to have your voice in Raleigh, and you don't have just one voice. You've got 4 voices right there. I will echo what he said about phone number. If you want to contact me, you can through the state office, 919-715-3005. And I will take it a step higher. I will even give you my cell phone number, 828-736-6222. And I welcome those phone calls. And I do get those from individuals that have issues or problems they'd like to have solved. We can't solve everybody's problem. It's just like it was when I was on the fire department. We'll come out there and we'll do the best we can for what the situation is. And the same applies of being in the State House. We will do the best we can, but sometimes there's things beyond our control that I just don't have a magic wand, put it that way. But again, thank you for the time today. Thank you for your information. Thank you for the listeners out there. And please, if we can do anything for you, please contact us, and I look forward to getting that information. And any information you have that can help me on the mental health issues or those other issues, please feel free to share it with me. Because information is power and knowledge, and that helps us get it. Because our people down there, I won't say they're bean counters, but they're factual people. They like to have the numbers. That's what they want to see. Thank you, Sarah, today, too.
Okay, welcoming to the podium Representative Gillespie.
Good afternoon. Representative Clampett, as I walked by, said to see if you can follow that act. No, Representative Clampett, I can't dress like you, and I'm not near as good looking as Senator Corbin, but I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you for just a few minutes. I appreciate the group that's put this together. I appreciate everyone that's involved in this. I appreciate the personal stories that were shared with us today. I think that anything that we deal with, we need to make it real. And I appreciate all the panelists. As I sat there, I didn't know whether to say that this was an opportunity or a curse, but Ronnie, Bill, and I can discuss it later. But I'm gonna call it an opportunity, since I'm in front of everyone, to serve with Ronnie, and on a consistent basis. Ronnie continued to impress upon me the importance of some of the subjects that was discussed here today. And I appreciate you, Ronnie. Appreciate you taking the time and doing that. We heard a lot of different things today. We heard a lot of different statistics. We heard a lot of different reasons why that this is good. And as I sit and listen to those and thought about what I might say when I got up here, I thought about what Dale Wiggins said and the biblical aspect, if we are Christians, about taking care of those around us really, really hit me. And Dale, you never know when you're going to give testimony to somebody, and I appreciate your comments today. I had benefit Monday meeting with a group of people. I won't put them on the spot, but they know who they are. And one of the things that we talked about was Medicaid expansion. And during that conversation, they shared a lot of great information with me and how that Medicaid expansion can help the 120th district. And one of the things that I left there with, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I realized that I didn't know enough about Medicaid expansion. So one of the things I did as soon as I got to Raleigh, as those that serve know, we have a physical research division, and they're a nonpartisan group that will give you as much detail as you can stand about any subject that you can imagine. And I've had the opportunity to sit down with those folks once this week, and we have a follow-up meeting next week for me to better understand Medicaid expansion, what it means to us in the 120th district in a nonpartisan manner. And so I stand before you today to say I'm here to represent the 120th district. I will do that to the best of my knowledge. I will do the best that I can to understand Medicaid expansion, and I will do what's best for for the citizens of the 120th district. Thank you.
Is Chief Sneed still here? Oh, okay. Unfortunately, we weren't able to hear from him in his comments. So that wraps up our event for today. I really appreciate all of the panelists and our representatives that joined us today and the sponsors for the event and those of you who are live streaming it and here in person. Thank you so much for being here and onward.